Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in. And in this video, I'll be talking about the difference between primary and secondary sources, which basically is one of the main components of the history study design, I think for the lower year levels in Victoria. But yeah, it's a very interesting topic in my opinion. So let's take it away. So primary sources are articles or accounts that are written from the time of an event or as close as possible to when an event unfolded. So they're basically written or published when an event took place or as close as possible to when an event took place. They are often seen as more accurate than secondary sources as they contain first-hand information of what unfolded in the time or place of an event. Primary sources can also include artifacts or manuscripts uncovered from the time an event took place. So your primary sources, yeah, they're usually extracted or they're published, they're written during the time an event took place. They don't just include, for example, articles. They can also include, yeah, artifacts, manuscripts, accounts from that time. Secondary sources are very different, however. They're written and published long after an event has taken place. So just making sure, yep, so they contain information which is gathered from analyzing and interpreting primary sources, and they're written by people who didn't experience the event firsthand. Secondary sources are often not seen as reliable, but they do offer insights into existing research. They can actually make them somewhat reliable. And basically, secondary sources are actually established by analyzing and interpreting primary sources. Now, I've got a few examples here of primary and secondary sources. Start off the primary source example. This is an article published by the Los Angeles Times in December of 1941, and it says Japs open war on US with bombing of Hawaii. Now, that's in direct relation to the Pearl Harbor bombings, and this was published in December of 1941, just after the bombings took place. And here I've got another example. So this is an example of a secondary source. It's the poster for the 2001 movie Pearl Harbor, which was directed by Michael Bay and yes, starred Ben Affleck, Josh Hartnett, and Kate Beckinsale. So again, not as accurate as articles taken from when the event unfolded, but it gives you a depiction of what actually occurred on December 7th, 1941. But this movie came out in 2001, so 60 years after the bombings took place. And as a result, it's a secondary source. Got another example of a primary source here. It's an article from the Times Dispatch, and it says Titanic giant white star liner sinks after collision with iceberg on her maiden voyage, and 1,800 lives are reported lost in world's greatest marine disaster. So this is an article about the sinking of the RMS Titanic. This was published in 1912, so the same year or just after the Titanic actually sunk. And as a result, it's a primary source because it was published in 1912, and the sinking of the Titanic occurred on the 15th of April, 1912. Here I've got an example of a secondary source. So it's the 1997 movie directed by James Cameron and yes, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, which is actually one of the highest grossing movies of all time, and it also won 11 Academy Awards. That's an example of a secondary source. So basically, it gives you a depiction of what actually occurred on that voyage of the RMS Titanic, and how the Titanic hit an iceberg, it sunk. On top of that, it's got a very long love story that takes place as well. But yeah, this is an example of a secondary source. And again, not as accurate as articles published during that time, but it gives you a depiction of what actually unfolded on that voyage. Got another example of a primary source here, a bit more recent, still a very long time ago now, be 24 years this year, but a bit more recent than the Titanic sinking and also the bombings of Pearl Harbor. This is an article published by the New York Times on September 12th, 2001. And it says US attacked, hijacked jets destroy Twin Towers and hit Pentagon in day of terror. So this is an article published one day after 9/11. Very, very tragic day that day. But yeah, so this was an article published the morning after 9/11, so it's a primary source. I've got an example of a secondary source here. It's the 2006 movie World Trade Center, directed by Oliver Stone and starring Nicolas Cage, Michael Pena, Marie Bello, and Maggie Gyllenhaal. So this movie came out in 2006, so 5 years after 9/11, and as a result, it's a secondary source. Compare it to Titanic, the movie, and also Pearl Harbor, the movie, didn't come out as long after the event, the incident that unfolded only 5 years after, but as a result, because it came out a while after the 9/11 attacks, it's still a secondary source. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Now, keep in mind, yeah, primary sources are often seen as more reliable. So your primary sources are articles, or for example, your articles, documents, manuscripts taken from when an event unfolded, whereas secondary sources can include, for example, a movie, a documentary, and a novel published long after the event unfolded. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Take care. Bye.